Olivier first showed signs of schizophrenia when he was 26, only a few years after my younger brother, Ben, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and then killed himself. I was enrolled in Montreal's National Theatre School at the time, and my then girlfriend, Cheryl, who later became my wife, called from Calgary to tell me that Olivier was behaving oddly. The behaviors she described seemed to so exactly parallel Ben's earlier symptoms that I was stunned. When I phoned to ask him what was going on, he confessed that he had been feeling peculiar for months. He thought he was being followed by mysterious figures, was convinced he was receiving messages through the television. Sometimes he heard whispers that he was worthless and should just give up. I urged him to see a psychiatrist, but he told me he was too afraid. The doctors and hospitals all held places of prominence in his paranoid visions. We agreed to stay in touch and monitor the situation, but after several long, anxious months, the illness developed strength and power, and over the Christmas break, Olivier made an attempt on his life. And this resulted in us driving in the middle of the night to the Holy Cross Hospital, where he checked into the psychiatric ward, December 23rd, 1980. Ben's death had been terrible on so many different levels. Terrible because of how young he had been when it happened, only 19. Terrible because of the suddenness, because it was needless, because it was irrevocable. And then Liv's diagnosis, following only a few years after, shook the whole family up badly. We wondered how we could move ahead, not knowing if the disease could be cured or whether it would end in disaster, not knowing how to help, worried that we'd make a misstep. It was an enormous, complicated puzzle. And 36 years later, my family is still trying to solve that puzzle. So that journey is roughly described in the book, The Unravelling, which chronicles the situation that my family found itself in as we provided care for Olivier, and then discovered that my mother, who he was living with, had developed dementia. I'm going to read a portion from the later texts, or texts later in the book, that I think describes the situation. My brother Nick, my oldest brother Nick, and I emailed back and forth trying to figure out what our next steps should be. But the problem was that everything about my mother and Olivier's living arrangements were so intimately intertwined. They co-owned an apartment, they split the monthly condominium fees, they shared grocery expenses, utility expenses, daily household responsibilities. They provided help and emotional support for one another in 1,000 different ways. Liv is much more resilient now, but there was a time when his survival was uncertain, and the shared living arrangements were, without exaggeration, a lifesaver. I've never much liked the term caregiving. It sounds too neat, too clear, too tidy. The impression it lends is that there exists a particular binary, someone who gives care, someone who gets it. But in my experience, that model's too simple. In reality, my mother provided financial and emotional support for my brother, certainly. At the same time, Liv provided emotional support and companionship and physical help for her. And my eldest brother, Nick, and I provided emotional support and assistance with groceries and communication with a variety of medical and government agencies, transportation to medical appointments, interventions when health situations arose. And it was a combination of all of these intersecting efforts that allowed everyone to carry on. What we provided was less a direct give and get than it was an interconnected network of care, like a spider's web. But it wasn't pretty. And the truth is that it more closely resembled the flawed, wonky structures generated by those spiders given LSD during the 60s lab experiments than the glorious dew-dappled symmetry you might spy hanging from some branches on an early morning walk. This web was fashioned as much from good intentions and competencies as from compensations, mistakes, and frailties. It sustained and supported, but only barely, and if you snapped a single thread, everything tumbled away.